Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome into Tom Curran's Patriots Talk podcast. I'm Tom Curran. Mike Hurley from CBS will join us shortly. No Phil Perry today. He will be back with us on Thursday. We're also going to get into some direct questioning I gave to Matt Patricia today on the conference call about those first 2 third downs of the game where the Patriots were disjointed. You'll hear Matt's reaction and explanation as it stands, as much of an explanation as I was able to extract. And also, Hurley and I are going to have a good time talking about Mac-ternatives. Who would you actually entertain bringing in to compete with Mac Jones in 2023? Have we fallen this far? Is Mac impenetrable, impervious, or is he ripe for the picking? But first, I want to get into a discussion of a sentiment that's definitely out there right now. And it's a sentiment that I understand. The Patriots control their own destiny right now. They have a limping Dolphins team coming in this weekend. They win this week. They win next week against Buffalo. They're in the playoffs. But people are pissed at the product. Understandably so. The last 2 games have very much had that feel of before Bill Parcells got here, you'd watch a Patriots game and say, they're going to find a way to lose this thing. And it might be in spectacular fashion. I'm not saying that totally ended when Parcells came, but they became plucky when Bill got here. And they found ways, especially at the end of his first season here in 1993. They won their last 5 games, finished 5-11. Next year, they're in the playoffs. And really, since then, they've been a team that finds way to wins way more often than any team in NFL history when you don't think they're going to. But we look at those first 2 third downs of the game that I'm going to ask Matt Patricia about, and see the results and see the lack of preparation following the week against Las Vegas when they were so inept down at the goal line that they actually entered into the record book, one of the worst goal line operations I've ever seen. Further, when you look at the final score of 22-18, you have to look at how that 22-18 came about. There was a ricochet touchdown off a guy named Scotty Washington on 3rd and 29 that went to Jacoby Myers. And there was a Joe Burrow throw that went directly to Marcus Jones and turned into a pick 6. 12 of those points came on plays that you're really not going to be able to count on. And there was a nice drive with Kendrick Bourne scoring a touchdown. So there's a sentiment out there that the Patriots don't deserve to be in the playoffs. Jim Murray, certainly not known as a paragon of optimism and goodwill, had this to say when our friend Andrew Callahan from the Boston Herald tweeted out, thanks to Miami's loss, the Patriots again control their playoff destiny. If they win out versus the Dolphins and the Bills, they are in. Big Jim from 98.5 tweets back, no rational person wants this. So I put out a poll really trying to plumb into this sentiment of not deserving to be in the playoffs, and just basically said, do you want the Patriots loyalists, to make the postseason? 43% said no, they don't. The other options were they stink, but I want them to go. And the other one was, of course, I want them to go. You know, I get the sentiment. The worry is that this is a team that doesn't deserve to call itself a playoff team. And you don't want them to go ahead and say, hey, we made the playoffs. We're not motivated to change. Everything's fine. We might run this thing back. I'm trying to resist it. I'm trying to resist the sentiment of they don't deserve to be in the playoffs, because I don't want to actively root against the team we cover out of cynical spite. I mean, our audience is the people who buy the tickets. They sit in traffic and then they cheer in the cold. There's some of you out there listening right now. You are those people. When you go, most of you want the team to win. There are definitely a few out there, my age, generally my age. You get to 30, 40, 50 plus, then you're like more of a screw them when things go badly. And you want them to suffer because they wasted your time and money and you're angry at them. But I grew up watching this team for a long, long time, and any win was a good win. A playoff game, I was over the moon, even if they were overmatched. And I remember being mystified in 1997 when I started on the beat by how many people covering the team reveled in its failings. I honestly didn't get it. Now I find that's sometimes me. The Las Vegas lateral, I watched that play unfold, and it was so deliciously, hysterically bad and proof of so many of the things that I've said have been plaguing them all season, that there was kind of I told you so type of sentiment that I felt. When I see them go into the red zone and there's a delay of game or a failure or there's communication issues, the same thing. I kind of, well, what do you want? There's a little tiny little smugness that I feel creep in because I like being right. And that's what changes when you cover a team. You are not a fan. I'm not paying you to be a fan. They're paying you to be an analyst of it and explain why things are happening. And when you're right about your analysis, there's a level of satisfaction that you did your job the way you were supposed to. But even though that's present, and even though I don't think they're going to win both games and get into the playoffs, I'm trying to resist the idea of rooting for them to not make the playoffs. I don't think that's unobjective because even now, working on the outskirts of the playoffs, I think that there's an understanding by this entire team after what we've watched for 15 weeks that a playoff berth is not going to be deodorant for a very stinky season. Michael Hurley has been waiting patiently on the green room of this StreamYard feed, and I bring him in now. Mike?
Hey.
Did you hear my sometimes eloquent, sometimes choppy explanation as to what I was trying to drive at here?
Yeah, I felt like I was at like a sermon. I loved it. It was great. A+.
Amen.
Can I tell you a quick story on that?
Please.
You mentioned the old days. I went to a game, my first Patriots game, 1993, December, Christmas time. They played the Cincinnati Bengals. They won 7-2. It was like, it was one of those games, and I went with my father and my brother, and these guys in front of us were pointing to a guy in our section. They said, that guy comes every week and roots for the other team. Every single week he comes and roots for the other team. And I didn't understand it at 7, but now here we are 30 years later, and it's maybe coming back to a degree, not nearly as bad as it was then.
But you do want them to get where they were. And in order to get where they were, they have to understand how bad they allowed it to get. So there is that sentiment. But I also think of little Mike Hurley watching that 1993 game with his big pom-pom hat and mittens and saying, why?
It's real cold. Sorry.
Yeah. I remember that. You also remember the Michael Timpson touchdown against, I think it might have been Buffalo in the last game of the year. Paul McGuire on the call. This team might not lose another game.
It's pretty
good. They did.
No.
They were on the cusp of moving to St. Louis at that point, too. They needed those wins. Go ahead.
Sorry, I keep cutting you off, Tom.
That's all right. It's a podcast. We're just having a free-flowing discussion, babe.
It just feels like an only in New England debate or discussion. Should the local team make the playoffs? I don't know that any other market is having that consternation. Like, oh man, if they make the playoffs, that would be bad. And I think this is the Tom Curran podcast, so I wanted to do my proper vocabulary. I believe it's endemic to all the success they had over 20 years to not be all jazzed up for losing in the wild card round. So I get it. I certainly get it that it seems meaningless, but I do think it kind of you lose perspective when you say you don't want the local team to make the playoffs.
Look at the 2009 team, 10-6 record. That stadium, when they lost 33-14 and fell behind grotesquely to the Ravens in 2009 in their playoff game, was significantly Ravens fans, and it wasn't full. That was after 2001, 2003, 2004 winning Super Bowls, 2005 ushered out 6 and 7. Obviously, you know what happened, and then 2008, the Castle year, 11 and 5. Still, people already, had already risen their level of expectation to that point where they're like, we're not going to consume this game. In 2009, it was similarly dysfunctional, but not quite. It might even be more dysfunctional, but the product on the field was not so abhorrent as to be unwatchable at times, which is what it is right now, Mike.
It's funny. I went to that game as well. My brother had tickets. And I said, I'll go. I was in the business, but not quite working every playoff game. So I was up in the 300s. Not a lot of excitement up there. And so then this weekend, when they're getting doors blown by the Bengals, I was like, oh, this kind of has that 09 playoff Ravens feel. And then I double checked the box score, and it wasn't even close. That was just the most miserable game I think we can ever remember. But
was it 24-0?
It was 24-0 at the end of the first quarter. So it was it was insane. You had a strip sack, you had the Ray Rice run, you had a normal drive, and I don't know how the field goal hit the mark. But the point is that team made the playoffs. And Bill Belichick knew all year long, we know from a football life, that team was not good, that major changes needed to be made. So I think if you're looking for evidence that making the playoffs doesn't necessarily mean that the team's just going to run it all back, 09 might be your thing. And maybe another wild card beatdown from the Bills or Chiefs is sort of the exclamation point on that.
It's funny. There was one of those, Bill was always pretty eloquent in his after the season press conference. And back then he and I, we're probably much more collegial than we are now. I just don't think he likes the cut of my jib and the angle of my questions these days. But I remember asking him during the exit press conference whether or not he had enough people to give him pushback in the organization. And he gave a very long and introspective answer about it. I'm going to try and find it right now. 20. All right. I actually found it, folks. All I did was Google Belichick pushback 2010. And I asked him that question about the makeup of the coaching staff and if he gets enough pushback from some of the young coaches he's helped groom. And he said, quote, Romeo or Charlie, they wouldn't really be afraid at times to say, what are you doing? Are you serious? Really seriously considering that? And then there was certainly another level of coach at that time or at this time that wouldn't say that to me. I understand that. I was like that. There was a point in time where I would never say anything, whether it was to Ted Marchibroda or Red Miller. Then there was a point in time where I would, mostly with Bill Parcells. We try to have an open communication, an open forum. Some things aren't open. This is the way they're going to be. I think that's something as a head coach you have to be conscious of, and I am. So I think that's going to be worth watching in the offseason is if he's getting enough pushback on some of his decisions, does he have the right people giving him pushback, or if he's still open to it the way he was in 2010, 13 years later? Michael, did you find that interesting? I found that interesting.
Yeah, because as you were saying, and I was going through, and it's like, all right, well, I look at, the personnel department being run by Matt Groh, not having much pushback. I think if there's an area where there's not much pushback, but then I look at the roster, and I'm like, the roster's not bad. The roster's pretty good. Like, for as much as you could point that out, it's really just an inexperienced offensive coaching staff. And that's not to say the defensive coaching staff is perfect, but we're not talking about it because of how bad the offensive coaching staff is. But I do think maybe we're at the point, and I do think Bill Belichick is one of the greatest coaches ever, if not the greatest. I don't know. You could debate that till the cows come home. But it might be time for an offensive head coach who, just like Josh McDaniels did, runs the whole offense, is the head coach of the offense. And then you can have a team that going into the playoffs, you're not saying, well, should they make it or should they not? You can go and saying, well, you can win this game, you can win that game, and then, you're having a fun January and February.
Because you just don't want to watch a team go out and play offense knowing that 2 touchdowns is the absolute limit. And one of them is going to come by such happenstance as it happened on Saturday that you just know it wouldn't be able to happen again. Why is that the case? Because the Patriots are disorganized. Maddeningly so. And I asked Matt Patricia about that, and Michael Hurley followed up this morning on our conference call. I asked Matt, who was ailing from a sore throat, about those 2 third downs at the start of the game. Tried to pin him down a little bit. Here's that audio. People are trying to fathom how on the first third down of the game, in such a key game in the 15th week of the season, there could be a play on which the 2 tight ends slam into each other, a couple of veteran players, because, third downs are key and they're practiced. And then on the next third down of the game against Cincy, there seemed to be a miscommunication where the play never happened. I know that you're probably not going to be direct, but can you be direct as possible as to why that would happen so deep into the season? Who's not getting it?
Yeah. It's a great point. I think, the first third down, we usually go in on third downs. We have, typically maybe a couple different options on the plays, depending on the coverage that we're going to see. And since they have a couple different packages that they run, both versus a nickel defense and a dime defense. And really just, when we went into that play, we had a really, play that we practiced and thought that, we had a couple good options on it. I think we saw the play a little bit different on the field and kind of clean that up from that standpoint. Certainly, I think those plays came up later in the game and we executed them well later in the game. We obviously didn't do a very good job on third down in the first half, trying to get a feel for some of the different looks that they had. Came out in the second half. And I think we went 6 for 6, to start the second half, somewhere around that end. So we got a lot of that cleaned up at halftime.
You get the discouragement of whether it be fans, observers, analysts who look at it and say, man, it's 15 weeks. Why would there be any idea that there's going to be traction going forward? I guess that's what I look at. It's like it's as if it hasn't gotten better in a key week like that. It's gotten worse.
Yeah. Well, I think third down this week actually was better than what it's been.
But I'm just talking about the design of the play.
Yeah.
Well, it's disastrous looking. And I'm sure you said the same thing on the sideline. You couldn't have been right.
It's definitely something that, you don't want to have happen during the game. And, you got to get it fixed. And, what happens on third down, I would say a lot of times is third down is the one down where it's very specific based on the defensive packages that come in. The coverages change. A lot of times on early downs, you'll get a lot of zone coverage. You'll get maybe one particular man coverage. And Lou does a good job with his defense and, has a lot of similarities to our defense and some of the coverages that they run and the pressures. We just, we got to do a better job of recognizing those and going out and executing it when they come up. Absolutely.
I wanted to ask about the sequence at the end of the game. A couple incompletions, 4th and 10, a delay of game, and then on 4th and 15, David Andrews snaps the ball and goes upfield on a deep pass. So clearly some communication issues there. Just why, I just kind of to add on to that, why do you think those are still happening in critical moments at this point of the year?
Yeah, I think only really just the one is the delay game. We were trying to get into a play. We had some guys in the game in different positions based on some of the injuries that happened earlier and maybe the previous 4 plays, and kind of moving some guys around. Very specific plays for the time that was left on the clock and getting that communicated. And then obviously recognizing, what Cincinnati was doing in that situation and trying to get that communicated. I think the last situation with David, that was probably just not really sure if quarterback was scrambling or not in the moment. I don't think that was a miscue. But other than that, we were, trying to get some specific plays thrown with the clock downfield in that situation to, to give us a chance to obviously put one up at the end.
Mike, still unsatisfying, and I knew it would be, but we can't just sit there and badger the guy. But you want to badger him because you know that he's looking at it and go, Jesus, this is not what I asked these guys to do.
Yeah, and it comes back to, we knew this. I actually, someone reminded me, it was on one of your network's programs in March, and it was, what's your biggest question going into the season? Mine was, is Matt Patricia going to be the OC? Because it's very important. We need the guy on the call sheet 3 steps ahead in the second-year quarterback's ear, guiding him through the NFL because he is a second-year quarterback. That was March 28th. I double-checked the date. This was not an unknown. This was not a surprise. And yet here you are at Christmas time having communication issues, having game planning issues, having clearly issues where the practice field is either not functional or it's not translating from the practice field to the game field. And it's Christmas. It's week 16, 17, and these basic peewee football issues are still cropping up. And like you said, we can't sit there and berate Matt Patricia because he's in over his head. He's doing a job he's never done before. Bill Belichick told us to blame Bill Belichick, but what are we supposed to do? Wag a finger at Bill Belichick every time we see him? There's nothing to do.
There's a point of diminishing returns on these Zoom videos or conference calls or podium moments. I know people in 2023, 2022, get all giddy and think that the notion of sitting there and screaming at a subject is, just pinning him down like a Mike Wallace and he's a corporate titan who's, or a slumlord. We're not doing that. It's a football thing. I'm not going to sit there and just holler at the guy. So that's diminishing returns. And that's why that's why Belichick's press conferences are useless, because you're not going to sit there and make a spectacle, generally speaking. I've tried it. It's not fun.
I've seen it.
I've seen it.
I've seen it.
Did Bill, this is my last question before we get to Mac-ternatives, which is going to be fun. Did Bill overestimate his own ability and Matt Patricia's ability and Joe Judge's ability? Or did he underestimate how good Josh McDaniels was at what he did?
It's a great question. I don't know that you can pick one over the other. I really think it's both. I think there was an appreciation for Josh. And to me, the biggest evidence of that was whatever Super Bowl when they did the do your job thing. It was them together, going through whatever game plan they had. Maybe it was Atlanta. I don't know. But when they did that, that showed like we are working together.
I think that was payback for Bill.
From
talk
what?
him, because I think they talked him off the ledge to going
Colts.
to Indianapolis. And then it was
the year after,
huge
right?
bouquet thrown to Josh to help to repair the perception that he couldn't be a head coach.
Yeah. Well, either way, he did it. And
he did do it. He did do it.
It was evidence of saying Josh did a great job late in the season. He came to me. Remember this. He said, Josh came to me and said, look, what are we doing trying to be a downfield passing team? We need to run the ball. We need to run our way. And they did. And they won it all the way, ran it all the way to a Super Bowl. So I think there was more an appreciation of Josh. So I would, if I was to answer your question, I would say overestimating the ease that his guys would have in doing it, because it's not easy. And just one last point on that. I still go back to John Mara's comment on Daniel Jones saying, we've done everything we could to screw this kid up right after they fired Joe Judge. And it's like, you bring that guy into Mac Jones, like, again, it's not necessarily Joe Judge's fault. Like assigning him to that position seems like it was a bad idea at the time, and it's not panning out a year into it.
No, you lose too. Not just McDaniels, but you also lose Mick Lombardi, who was the wide receivers coach, but he was an assistant quarterbacks coach. So there's a voice and a professional who's been around the Patriots offense and running it and coaching it. You lose Bo Hardigree, who was the assistant quarterbacks coach. Again, he's not heading to Canton. Most likely Bo isn't, but it's a voice. It's a trusted guy. It's somebody who understands the operation offensively and how the Patriots have traditionally done it. And then you
Carmen Brasillo.
And Carmen Brasillo, excuse me. And then you ask Matt to replace Carmen Brasillo as the offensive line coach with Billy Yates as his assistant. But you also ask him to be the play caller and the offensive coordinator, which is asking someone to be a pilot and also whatever. Stop with the metaphors.
Fix a hole in the tail.
and then you do those two things and you say, oh, and while we're at it, we're going to do things entirely different from the way we did before. So that you have to start these guys from scratch and erase their brains from what they all learned together. Well, I wonder why it didn't work.
And it's not just that. It's not just that. Just real quick, but you had Ernie Adams leave. You had Ivan Fears leave. You had Dante Scarnecchia leave, and that's natural. That is the course of life. But they haven't been properly replaced with guys that are ready to fill in. And I just think it's boring to talk about the O-line too much. But when you go from Dante Scarnecchia to Carmen Brasillo and Cole Popovich, and then Cole Popovich is out, and just Carmen Brasillo, and then Matt Patricia, like you can't run an offense without an offensive line. So I think it's issues compounding other issues.
And Joe Thuney and on and on. If you're like me, there's a little longing going on right now. As much as you might have previously believed in Mac Jones, there have been enough throws in 2022 and enough woes to make you wonder, what would things look like if someone else was in here instead of Mac or to compete with Mac? So Mike and I are going to engage in something called Mac-ternatives. Yup or nope. Would you bring this individual in for the stated capacity and then a brief reason? The guy who got this going for me, Mike, it's very simple. Would you bring Baker Mayfield in to compete for the starting job with Mac Jones in 2023?
Yep, I would. And listen, I know Baker Mayfield's a divisive topic, always has been, but do we know he's bad? Because I look at Mac as someone with 2 offensive coordinators in 2 years, messed up. Baker Mayfield has had 4 offensive coordinators in Cleveland. He had Todd Haley, he had Todd Monken, he had Alex Van Pelt, then he had the Matt Rule, Ben McAdoo duo. So am I going to judge him? I'm not judging Mac Jones for this year. So am I going to judge Baker Mayfield for what he's been through? No, let's bring him in. He's spicy. I love it.
Better arm, better mobility, a little bit more divisive, probably not as good a leader as we heard coming out of Cleveland, but he's a better athlete and throws the ball better. I'd say bring him in. Mike, Jimmy G, bring him in to compete?
Nope. Belichick loves him too much to compete. He's the starter if he's here.
Okay. He's also too injury prone, and I don't know what advantage he brings over Mac. He's basically Mac with injury issues. Gardner Minshew didn't look too bad the other day with the Eagles. Would you bring him in to back up?
Yes. I like Gardner Minshew. I think he's always been pretty good NFL quarterback, can win you a couple games, which, I mean, you already have that in Bailey Zappi, but I like Gardner.
Yeah, and Brian Hoyer's going out. That's why I'm talking about backups. Most likely Brian Hoyer will be going out, and I think you need somebody better than Bailey Zappi to be a heartbeat away, and I also think there is a need for competition. How about Carson Wentz? Wentz. Also, no. Let's not spend a lot of time
all done
on
with him. No.
Tom Brady, would you bring him in to start?
You're asking the wrong guy, because that's an obvious yes from this guy for probably the wrong reasons, just the story. But hey, why not? I mean, it's Tom Brady, it's New England. Have a little Disney magic in your life. Let's make it happen.
Sam Darnold, would you bring him in to back up?
I wouldn't bring him in to carry Mac's pads. Like, what are we doing? No, thank you on Sam Darnold.
I don't think so either. Okay, and these are would you trade fors? Derek Carr. Would you trade for Derek Carr for Mac straight up? Forget about the contract.
Nope. I think he's like the pinnacle of maybe what Mac's ceiling is considered, but he makes $1 billion. So nope.
Yeah, I think that Mac's better than Derek Carr. I watched some really hellacious throws and decisions by him, and I don't think he's nearly as tough as Mac. Kyler Murray.
Nope. Same reason.
Stay off the contract.
Well, it's a big factor. I don't. If
I
have a guy,
off it.
Fine. If I have a guy though that is okay, I don't want to have that much money dedicated to him. No, and I don't know if you watched Hard Knocks at all. They didn't love Kyler. His whole vibe. Not my favorite.
Taylor Heineke. Would you trade Mac Jones straight up?
Yeah. Maybe I'm an idiot, but I like that kid. He's got spunk. He plays hard. Maybe he stinks. I don't know, but I like
better
him.
Arm. Does he have a better arm?
I don't know.
Mac's arm is really, it hasn't improved.
Yeah, there was a couple throws
where it is what it is.
A couple extra
Speaking
ticks,
of bad arms, Speaking of bad arms, this is the last one, Mike. Then we're going to untether you. Tua Tagovailoa, would you trade Mac Jones straight up for Tua, regardless of the head issues that he's dealing with? Hope he's feeling better, of course. That's no snark. Would you trade Mac straight up for Tua?
No. I mean, what I've seen from Tua is he has Tyreek Hill on his team, which is great. That's great, but I also see Tyreek Hill waiting for those deep balls to get to him. So I don't see the need to make that move.
All right. We're going to put a cork in this podcast. This was fun. I think we got a lot done. We'll get to the matchup with the Dolphins later in the week. But for now, so long. Bye, Mike. Thank you.
Bye.